Hey there everybody. You can tell when it's not a market day. But we're making our way down to the lower pond in the woods today. The forecast is claiming that we're going to get around half an inch from a weather storm that is coming in northwest bound from the Atlantic Ocean. And I am hopeful that that is the case. I took a little time before I started filming and did some math, so I'm going to share some numbers and resources with you guys during this video, and I hope that you find some of the strategies we're employing helpful on your site. So with that said, let's get started. So here we are down at the pond. This is about halfway from the house to the back corner of the property in the northwest. If you look right there where that little tree is, let me zoom in for you a little bit. So right there, where that little tree is going between the fern and the very small maple, that is the usual level of the overflow creek for the pond. This is the level that the pond is at. There is a 10-foot difference in the pond, and there's still another 10 to 12 feet of depth down there. So the pond is definitely deeper than I had initially expected, but what we did is I paced out the circumference in two spots. One at the point of the overflow capacity of the pond, and one at the current water level. There is debris and there are frogs, and it is very treacherous along that edge. So I did have to fudge my numbers a bit, but where necessary, we fudged it to most accurately represent, given the differences in the shape of my steps. So after getting my measurements, I plugged it into a calculator. The calculator function is to find the cubic foot volume, or the volume in cubic feet, for a conical frustrum. And that's basically a cone without the point. And so what we're doing is we're measuring the difference between this edge and this edge with a known slope and height. And what that did, or the numbers it gave me, rather, came out to this. The top radius, that's the one up top, is approximately 31.83 feet. Now obviously this pond is kidney bean shaped, so that's a little bit fudged, but like I said, rough numbers to get an idea. The point, or the circumference that I measured here, gave us a radius of 22.28 feet, and the height difference is 10 feet even. That gives us 23,234.38 cubic feet. And with 7 gallons and change for every cubic foot, that equates to approximately 173,805.21 gallons of water that this pond has distributed to our ecosystem down here during this very long drought. We're very far under historical averages for this season, so this bit of rain right here is so welcome. This is going to be, I think, the first all-day rain event that we've had since April. Let's take a look at some ways that we're trying to keep it on the property and discuss how we think it all ties together. So we're currently about 10 feet away from the property line. You can see the little marker on that tree over there, and there's another one a little further down, but that's neither here nor there. There's one on that tree right there. So we're off of the curves, and if you look closely ahead of us, you can see these dips and undulations in here, right? I hope you can see that. Okay, we're zooming back out. So this is the main spot right in here where water leaves our property and drains into the neighboring space. And as it continues down channels like that, it will make its way to the river at the west end of this parcel behind us. When we come out here, what we like to do is take any pieces of debris that we can. You can see some of it still here. This particular gully in front of us used to be a few inches lower, and we've just been stacking sticks and letting the overflow from our property dissipate. Up ahead, technically not in our property, but similar, we'll stick impediments like this. And my plan is to scavenge some of the waste that's over here and just kind of make a little blockage. I am not looking to stop all of the water from flowing out. That would be selfish, and it's not going to work. At some point it will overflow the system and continue on. However, if we can build something like a leaky weir down in here to slow the speed of the water that we're sending this way, what we will be able to do is to provide a greater overall saturation to the space behind those last bits. And so by slowing and preventing the water from leaving the site as easily, this should provide a backstop to the water, which will cause it to infiltrate more deeply throughout the uphill sections from here, which contains our whole property. Everything is upslope from this point. And just a little side-by-side comparison. This, everywhere we're standing, all of that behind it used to be this, and it still is everywhere I control. We're in roughly the same spot after about 5 minutes of work. What I did was find one slightly larger log and one very much bigger log to go into the catchment area with this small one. And one of the aspects of this that I'm really leaning into is the crisscrossing and the shoving of sticks into void spaces, but not creating a flat or non-permeable structure. The reason I'm doing this is we have beavers in the river back there, and with the current drought, you're able to see a lot more detail in their dam designs. And what I've been doing is leaning into one of their strategies of packing these spaces with sticks to slow any more detritus, like the leaf litter, seeds, or any soil that is kicked up and moving at rapidity. This creates a way for the water itself to flow through and pull some of this debris to better fill that space over time. So it takes less effort, I create less disturbance, and this will continue to work to allow some water to flow through it, but also build up material so that over time that flow rate lessens. Once I've confirmed that my neighbor's done with this round of cutting and felling and chipping and things, I'll try to figure out a safe path through this way, or maybe I'll just take the road. But I'll go back to the river and show you guys where it all leads out to once I am sure that I am not going to get him in trouble with his rentals or find myself in a sticky wicket. Let's look uphill. We're in the runoff channel that I lovingly call the creek, and even though this is only about a foot deep, between there. We have been building up the sides, and you can see that with the collection of the organic matter and some of these semi-check dams, it's kind of like a footbridge, but not really. But you can see how we'll occasionally harvest some of the anoxic litter material from in here to harvest up and build up the sides. And so in that way, we will occasionally make our way up to something like this. And if this were to fully overflow, it will head off into some of these little ditches on the other side of the property line. And this used to feed the bog back here, I think. However, having channels that are roughly level, akin to a swale, but any sort of catchment dish or ditch that is mostly stable will help to trap and hold water, and that lens of water as it seeps in here will diffuse this way, still going with gravity but also heading laterally, and that will help to provide the water needs for the trees downslope. This kind of planting strategy, trees on berms or trees just below berms, is a very common application of swales or pit and mounds, which I've mentioned in a few other videos. But this small diversion, while yes, filled with tree roots, filled with sparse vegetation, I'm fine with it. This overflows seasonally and fills seasonally at this point, and I think that any kind of attempts to clay it or solidify the base for longer term storage would have follow-on effects that I'm not necessarily interested in having. Let's move further upslope. In the woods, we've been adding some of the wood chip we've been receiving throughout the season to the garden beds. We're currently just along the main tractor path leading up behind the bird yard, and you can see some of the woody materials still poking through, but we've been just depositing small piles like that and then stepping them or leaving them lumpy, as you can see here. Part of the consideration for these is that I want hundreds and hundreds of years of cumulative nutrient storage in the form of ramial chips to be deposited in these garden beds. Many of us who garden in New England know that our soils are hungry and very often sandy, and large stones, lots of gravel or granite or fieldstone, a lot of weathering of soils left over from the last glaciation period. And so when we have thirsty trees that don't drop a ton of foliage, and while we've been encouraging the hardwood mix here, we are still a pine dominant area. So those pines are very, very thirsty, and the soil becomes very, very hungry because there is not as much deposition of fall litter to these spaces. And while you might think that this particular berm path here is quite steep, and I don't necessarily disagree with you, we are working from the top down and pacing out to build more catchment structures. We have some leaky weirs in various places along this hillside here, and then as we get down into this area, I'm thinking around where the base of this pile is, I'd like to bring something on contour along this way. But if I turn around, you can see this area levels off precipitously, and once it's down here, it will necessarily come this way and begin to feed this soon-to-be garden space and then seep further back, and with each successive push back of that water, it will help to hydrate the spaces behind it. Likewise, the small bits of berm on contour that we've been working on up this way will help to slow the water coming down slope. We'll do something very similar as what we've been doing in the woods, in that once we have our lines laid out. Hey there, Mr. Chipmunk. So once we have our lines laid out, what we'll be able to do is take some of the tree branches and we'll do crisscrossing patterns over and behind, and then we'll backfill with more wood chips, and that will, or should, help to continue the pattern of very little digging to avoid damaging some of these great big trees that have every right to be here. Let's move upslope. Having catchment ponds partway up your hill or your slope is a good way to provide a little bit of a stopgap measure, potentially raise some kind of protein or vegetation on that captured water, and then, if it's livestock, provide a fertigation effort to the slope behind it, which in this case is an apple tree that I do have to do some work to, but also various fruit bushes, ferns, and some other high-value long-term plants that we've planted in here, including elders and hazelnuts and a few chestnuts, some lindens, various and sundries. As this travels down slope, some of that fertilization is going to hit here, but some of it will diffuse down into the soil, and then biology will be able to continue circulating it through the system as it moves downhill. I don't believe that the fertigation will make it quite so far as to impact the vegetation that's on the other side of the tractor path down there. Or I don't expect that it'll happen in a short time frame, but that long term, the diffusion of these minerals will cause greater and greater amounts of biology in sort of a tumbling down, cascading effect, where one spot is so fertile and good that subsoil creatures are coming upslope to get it, and distributing channels that the water and the nutrient will be able to drain through in the subsoil. Let's keep moving upslope. The thing I would like to mention is that this pond, while fed from the rain collection off of the back of the garage, is also fed off of the driveway via this path of compacted wood chips. There is some percolation down, but a lot of it during heavy events will come right this way and in and towards the duck yard. The inlet for the pond is in here, and there is a scoop down and into that main swoop. The edges of our chip-based gardens are all on contour as well, except in areas where the consideration is drainage or an overflow to a different garden that runs opposite but parallel. So all of this catches any of the surface runoff that might occur from this whole hillside. Likewise, the food forest area is also planted with a consideration for the flow coming towards us, but each one kind of will be a small swoop, and then the northern ends will have a catchment in the long term to help catch the surface flow in sort of a concentric half ring, semi-ring kind of pattern. But the other part of this is that all of the biology that we have planted in here is also sending roots down into the soil. And so it's not a swale, but because of the layout of the plants, we have sort of an uphill net an above ground net and a below ground net that is causing the rapid draining sandy soil to hit biology that is uptaking that water furiously, especially due to the droughty conditions. Right now, I'm getting some light sprinkles, and I think, given the way that the radar looks and some of the current measurements, I expect that this will ramp up moderately in the next couple of hours, but we should have a fairly steady drizzle that will help to pre-wet some of the surface soil, which will hopefully assist with the water uptake. In the sandiest and least healthy soils, maybe that's a wrong term for it. Maybe a better term would be soils that are undergoing heavy repair. So in these places, I could sheet mulch entirely, but I think that that would deprive the soil of the much needed humic acids and other plant exudates, long hydrocarbon chains and proteins that the plants inject into the soil that promotes the biology that will then promote further plant health. So we are spot mulching the blank spots. I may have talked about this in an earlier video, and sometimes it's the raw chips, sometimes it's some bits and twigs, sometimes it's bits of biochar, but in all of these spaces where the chips have been cast down, after a few mornings of easy dew, these start to stick to that very dry soil, and if the moisture stays around for a long enough period of time, which it hasn't really been doing lately, it will begin to release some of that held moisture back to the soil microorganisms. Here's a spot you can see where there's just some char and some wood chips, and I don't know if you guys can see it, but there is a difference in tone of color between the ones that are just downhill of the char and the ones that are just uphill of the char. So that's a promising sign. I think that all of these strategies are a piece of the overall soil water capacity flow. Long term, I think, to take down this tree and this tree here. They are not the happiest of campers, to be sure. But if I were able to remove these two trees safely, I think that the case could be made for a large-ish pond, well engineered to hold water here and slowly release it downslope. I'd be hesitant to do it directly behind me, because that is the break in our farmer's wall that allows access for my pickup and the tractor, and for the neighbor to have access for their truck as well. So I think impacting that or impeding that access point is a bad plan. So I think something with a good engineering will take the topsoil and solidify some of the pathways here, or maybe distribute it. It's going to be mineral earth for the most part, and it will not be very much more than sand, but I think the case can be made to integrate it into some of the downhill gardens that exist and some of the ones that we're building. And I think that that is going to pay dividends in the long run, both with the deposition of more soil downhill to help control some of the erosion that was happening before we took ownership of the parcel, and having a catchment system at the very top that we may potentially be able to pump water from the bottom to. will help to rebalance the soil hydration for the upslope portion, which, as this area gets stronger, by necessity holding more water, the rest of the property back there should follow along, especially if we're blocking the exits along that back line that we were at earlier. So those are some of the strategies that we're employing today and this season as we make our observations. I'm curious to hear what other additions, subtractions, or modifications you all might suspect could help. I'd be very much interested into setting up a small-scale experiment and observing with you. So that's going to do it for today. I have a few more chores to do as the rains come in, but I hope you are all well. Until next time, thanks for watching. Happy planting.